love, love, until I be but breath of the Spirit flowing in me.
Welcome to the Spirit of Life program. My name is Lucia Pace, and today my guest is Terri Kelleher. Terri is the Victorian President of the Australian Family Association, which is a family values organisation. Welcome to our program, Terri.
Thank you for the invitation, Lucia.
It's a delight to have you with us.
I'm delighted to be with you.
Thank you. Now, Terri, perhaps we can start with a little bit about your background and how you became the president, to lead us into how you became the president of the Family Association.
Yes, my qualifications are as a lawyer. I did a law degree at Monash University, and then I went into practice. My main area of practice was with a big industrial trade union. Mm-hmm. I was the solicitor for the union for many years. Mm-hmm. Now that was associated with the work I'm doing now, in that I work for the Australian Family Association. I'm also an officer of the National Civic Council, mm-hmm. and the National Civic Council always had ties with the trade union movement, mm-hmm. In that members of the union movement were encouraged to go and stand in elections and get themselves elected and play an active part in the union movement. So I was always aware of the National Civic Council and the Australian Family Association, which was set up by the National Civic Council in about 1980.
Mm-hmm. The Australian Family Association?
The Australian Family Association was an initiative of the National Civic Council.
Right.
The founder of the National Civic Council, Mr. B.A. Santamaria, was very far-sighted, and he realised, in particular after the 1975 enactment of the Family Law Act, that the family was going to be under considerable attack and stress. So he realised that for that part of the work of the National Civic Council, there needed to be a separate organisation devoted to it. So it is sort of, it's an initiative of the National Civic Council, but we also act fairly independently because there are so many issues surrounding the family, and we deal with those on a constant basis, which means that you get your expertise and your area of knowledge, which is fairly specific and expert knowledge.
And then, so where did you go from there? What happened after that?
After I finished at the union, which was as a result of what was happening at the time politically, the union movement was being encouraged to merge into super unions, industry unions. I worked for a union that was actually based on occupation. Now, that meant that the occupations that people had, what work they did, might be spread throughout any number of industries. So our union had to merge. And at the time there was a great struggle as well, a political struggle, sort of left and right, and there was a need to work out who was going over to the merged union, who wasn't. I was having a fourth baby, and I thought this was going to be, too much of a very highly charged environment. So I left the union, and I was at home then, looking after my children, and I was a consultant to my husband's private practice. He's also a solicitor. Then when our youngest went to school, I thought, well, what am I going to do now? And I spent a couple of years doing discovery on big international legal cases, which I enjoyed as a way of getting back in, perhaps going back into the profession.
Can you explain what discovery is for the viewers that may not understand?
Well, discovery in a case is when the case goes to court, mm-hmm. And you have two litigants, there are documents that will be relevant to the points that each party wishes to establish in order to establish his case or to defend mm-hmm. what the other party is claiming, and the judge will make an order to discover the relevant documents. So in big international cases there'll be hundreds of thousands of documents. So at the time they were actually tendering out the firms to get these huge discoveries done. The first one was actually, it entailed documents in about 10 or 12 different languages, and they wanted law graduates, because you have to be a law graduate, you have to understand how the documents are categorised, and is that document relevant or isn't it relevant? You know, it's in the case or it's out. But they wanted them with language skills, and language is another area of great interest to me. I'd always been interested in languages.
Yes.
And so I applied to go on the French team, and I got the job, and I was there for about 6 or 7 months, I think, and I decided to leave. Christmas was coming up. I thought, well, now I will do this each year. It's, you know, I was tendering my expertise myself as a private individual. You know, I wasn't being employed by the firm. So I could work for several months each year and do these very interesting cases. And then the global financial crisis arrived, and all that work shut down almost overnight.
So what happened for you then? What opened up for you then?
Well, then I sat down and thought, what am I going to do now? I can't just, you know, sit at home, even though there were lots of things to do there. What can I do? I volunteered to do some writing for the Australian Family Association, or in fact they asked me to write. I used to go and do a bit of voluntary work for them, but then they asked me to write for their publication, their journal, which I did, and produced quite a number of articles. It was slowly, bit by bit, I found I was doing more and became drawn more and more into the organisation. So that is the story of how I arrived at the Australian Family Association.
Right, and obviously you didn't go into the president's position straight away?
No.
Right.
No.
I'd be very interested in learning how that happened for you and how that evolved and what the process was before you got there. So we're actually going to go for a break now, so we'll maybe pick up that point when we come back.
Yes.
We'll be back shortly. Hello, welcome back. My guest today is Terri Kelleher, Victorian President of the Australian Family Association. Welcome back, Terri. Terri, just before the break, I asked you if you could lead us into perhaps just give us snippets of how you became the President of the Family Association.
Well, first of all, I was asked to become the Secretary. That was after perhaps a year. I'd been there about a year. And we are organisations that have to raise our own funds. We don't have a lot of full-time employees. So they're very careful about who they, you know, invite or who we invite into the organisation as paid employees. But they did need someone, and they did need someone who was a full-time employee to take over the Victorian secretaryship, as the Victorian Secretary became the National Secretary. So I a little bit reluctantly agreed to do that, which was pulling me a little bit more into the organisation. And then after 12 months, I was asked to become the Victorian President, because the Victorian President had taken a position with the National Civic Council, and it was becoming quite an onerous role. And at the same time, we have quite a young Victorian Secretary of the Australian Family Association, and that is a very important thing, that, you know, we have the younger ones coming on. So
very important.
I was very happy to introduce her to the role, and that too was sort of gradual. You know, before you know it, you're doing it, and then they said, well, would you take the office, and you know, would you nominate for office?
Yes, it's one of those things that life sets out for you, doesn't it? It all sorts itself out somehow.
Yes.
Terri, I'm interested to know a little bit about your childhood foundation and how it actually influenced what you're doing today. Because I'm very intrigued on how people's childhood foundations do somehow come into play later on in life. Is that the case for you?
I think it is.
Yes.
Yes, the two things about my childhood, I think, one, I was born in the country, so I had a country childhood, And I do think that that allows you, I think, a lot more time to develop your thought processes, you know, you're thinking about issues. And secondly, I was born into a Catholic family, and it was at a time and in an area where Catholicism was very strong, and, you know, we were sent to Catholic schools. So that definitely had a very strong influence, you know, on my formation.
In what way?
Well, it formed my values, and it also, I think, the basic thing with me, this might just be a personal thing, for me in life, the really important thing is to seek the truth. To seek the truth.
Yeah.
And I found as I left that small country town when I was, you know, barely 18, and I had to come to the city. I'd hardly been to Melbourne before I came to Melbourne to study at university. It was all very new to me. So everything was there, you know, on a platter for me to look at. Well, you know, I can really think about my values, I can make my choices. This was at a time when there was a huge social upheaval too, you know. It was really the time of the social and sexual revolution. They'd been going for a good 10 years by then. So it was a huge change.
How did that affect you, coming from a fairly orthodox, grounded Catholic foundation, from the country, fairly protected and secluded, and then coming into the city life, and now you've come into this social evolution, or is that?
Yes.
Yeah. Social
revolution. It was really the revolution.
Is
yes.
On the
so this is back in the 70s, a long time ago.
So
it's
how
back
did
in
that
the
affect
70s.
you? Like, what was happening inside you at that time?
Well, I found it very exciting. I felt very, I'd always been a very independent thinker. I think that some people felt their Catholicism and their Orthodox education didn't allow them to think. I found the opposite. I found that our education, academically and religiously, actually made us think about cause and effect and to seek the truth.
Wow.
And not just perception about things, but the truth.
Yes.
So anyway, I went and I saw these people. They were living together. There was marijuana was, you know, freely accepted. It was smoked out in the open. I mean, I'm sort of looking at all these things, but I was 18, 19, so I wasn't a prude, and I'm not thinking, oh, that's very bad. I'm just thinking, why are these people doing this? I had enough foundation, such a solid foundation, to independently think about the issues.
Yes.
And I made the decision, the call on these sorts of issues, that they weren't good for the person. I thought, I don't think. I'm looking at girlfriends, for instance, who are really depressed and upset and anxious because they have become sexually involved with, you know, a young man, and he's not really thinking about a permanent relationship. And I was wondering, well, I know that you can think it was just a simple thing to be taught, as we were, the place of the expression of your sexuality, but I can see why now. So I made definite choices. One choice I did make, which you might find interesting, was I thought, I don't have to go to Mass anymore. Not that I'd ever really had to go, but you never questioned. That was a gift, in fact, that all of the older people in my life, my parents, my grandparents, my friends' parents gave to us, there was never any questioning. So I thought, well, I don't have to go to Mass. And I thought I should feel sort of relieved and freer because I don't have to. But then, you know, I forgot not to go. Now, you mightn't believe me, but I forgot not to go to Mass.
You meant to go.
And after about 3 weeks, I just gave up. I thought, well, it's not hurting me. In fact, you know, it was further down the track I began to realise the nurturing that I got from Mass, because things got rockier, you know, as you got older and society became more secular and I had more adult decisions to make.
And you made a very interesting point before, which I'd like to just reflect back for you and the viewers, that the fact that the perception, the general perception is that if you go to church or you have a religious foundation, that you're almost brainwashed into thinking in a particular way. But in fact, you were saying it gives you the freedom to make choices and to try to identify truth in a situation. On that note, we need to go for another break. We'll be back soon. We'll see you back after the break. Welcome back. My guest today is Terri Kelleher from the Australian National Family Association. Yes.
Hello, Lucia.
Terri, please just give us an insight into what a typical day looks like for you at work and what the foundation or the association actually does. What's their role?
Yes, the Australian
What
Family...
What issues do they address? Yeah.
Yes. The Australian Family Association is a family values group, and we are concerned. We have 5 objectives. They all to do with cultivating an understanding within society of what the function of the family is, of protecting the family so that it can carry out that function. So we look at public policy, government policy, legislation for its impact on the family. So in those areas, for example, we would look at, say, the impact on the family of drugs, alcohol, classification of films and videos. We've just been dealing with the introduction of an R18 plus category for video games, and we were opposed to that on the grounds that it would introduce more violent material into video games that would be more accessible and available to children younger than 18, to young ones younger than 18. Right. At present there is no classification above MA 15 plus. Mm-hmm. So the point is that anything that doesn't fit into MA 15 plus should not be available in Australia. It will not be available on the shelves in the video stores, nor to be sold. But once they introduce R18 plus, our view is they will be available, and young ones under 18 will have access to them. And that is...
So now you've got that research, you've done all the research,
yes.
You've gathered all the research. What do you do with that?
We'll make submissions to government inquiries, which we have done. I had a number of interviews just recently by the press, that's radio and TV, on our view of the R18 plus category, which they have introduced. Mm-hmm. So we do that sort of thing. You know, we make submissions to government inquiries. We made submissions to the House of Reps and the Senate inquiries on the marriage equality bills that are before the federal parliament. We made a submission, these are just the ones this year, on the new family violence amendments in the Family Law Act. We've made submissions on the paid parental leave policy of the government, the present government, and also of the opposition. We don't think that either of their policies are the best way to go. So these are the sorts of issues, and at the moment it is Australia 21. It is an organisation that has put out its view of legislating to decriminalise and regulate the possession and use of marijuana and amphetamine-like drugs here in Australia. Now, we are supporting another organisation. This is another thing, another objective of the Australian Family Association. We work with other organisations that do similar things. So there's Family Voice Australia, for instance. In this case, it's Drug Free Australia. They put out a really good position paper opposing the legal decriminalisation of these drugs and the reasons for it. Well, see, we support that. Now, we will give our official support as the Australian Family Association to their position. So it's formally and also at another level by taking interviews with the press, radio, TV, newspapers.
Thank you for that. I'm just wondering now, okay, you're doing all this wonderful work, you're informing and educating and providing info and viewpoints. How effective is that in terms of the reception of it to the people that you're subscribing to the government and government departments, etc., political arenas? How receptive are they, and how effective are you? And have you been heard in any of your issues that you've put forward? And can you give us an example? Sorry, that's a very loaded question. Yeah.
Can I start with the press?
Sure.
Now, we face a very hostile press because I think in society generally, those who are we're really being governed by elites in all different areas. In the press, the elites are, as in most other areas, lean towards secular humanism. So they are not friendly. Not that they would be rude to you or unpleasant. They're very pleasant.
Biased, do you find them?
Yes, they are biased. And that's what I mean by they are a hostile press. They will always, almost inevitably, put whatever the Australian Family Association says in a poor light. And that can be done, you must understand how that can be done in a newspaper article. I like live radio, and they don't like me because I do it very well. They can't cut you off because they need you for the segment.
Right.
So you get to say what you want to say. I don't like pre-recorded interviews because then they edit and they will only use what they want to take out of it. TV, the same. I'm not comfortable with TV because they do edit. But live radio, often they're not asking the right questions. They're asking questions that don't get to the heart of the issue.
Indeed, yeah.
For example, talking about, what can I think of, smacking or spanking, even if it's something that seems, pretty trivial. I say, look, what we should be looking at is actually child abuse and the abandonment of children and how many children there are in out-of-home care. I said, spanking or smacking is not child abuse.
No, it's sometimes it's very much needed from a disciplinary sense.
Well, it should be a discipline. Well, our view is it should be
love rather than abusive.
Yes, well, it should be a disciplinary tool, I think, available to parents. Our view is it's a parental prerogative, and that there is a clear line that you overstep.
Indeed.
Between a spanking or a slap and abuse, and that abuse is what we have to be concentrating on.
It's almost like that they're distracting us from the main issues that we should be addressing and looking at.
I don't think they're distracting us from it. I think that they're really taken up with it because they don't really see what the issue is.
Oh, okay.
Then when you look at child abuse, now the report that came out last year from Sydney University, Professor Patrick Parkinson's report was called For Kids' Sake. The numbers of children in out-of-home care had escalated. These are children put into foster care because their home situation is either non-existent or too dangerous.
Wow.
Now that was the result of de facto relationships and the breakdown of marriages.
Terri, we've come to the end of our program, but I would like to know if you'd like to come back next week, because I'd really like you, apparently just recently you've given a talk on freedom being ripped apart.
Yes.
I'd like very much for you to come back and discuss that with us.
I'd be delighted. Thank you, Lucia.
Thank you for coming on the show, Terri. You've been watching the Spirit of Life program. We'll see you again, same time, same place. Take care. And before we go, I would like to ask our viewers that the Spirit of Life is currently seeking financial support in order to continue producing our program. If you can help in any way, please contact me on lucia@spiritoflifetv.net. Any contribution, no matter how small, would be greatly appreciated. Thank you. See you again next week.
Bring it to birth and blow where you will. Blow, blow, blow till I be but breath of the Spirit.